Alrighty folks, want to welcome you back to another video from Yates Computers Tips and Reviews. This is the big one. This is your deployment of your network. Your planning, your layout, your running, how you're going to do everything. Of course, most deployments of networks nowadays at home is you get internet. They come out, they ask you what kind of modem you want. You want with Wi-Fi or without Wi-Fi most of the time. Nowadays, most of them all come as one big bundle with the Wi-Fi, everything in it. Depending on what key features, streaming, other things, some I've heard have a streaming box and all kinds of other stuff that attaches and stuff like that. Now, even for businesses, you usually have your network. How all your computers, all your devices are going to communicate. Are you going to communicate wirelessly or wired? What kind of wire? What gauge wire? Cat 5, Cat 6, Cat 7, Cat... Whoa. Cat 8, shielded, unshielded. A lot of variables here. Shielded, unshielded, server to switches, switches to computers, switches to routers. All those fun things you got to figure out. That's your deployment. Oh, man. Hold on one moment, folks. Alrighty, folks. I want to welcome you to another video from Yates Computers Tips and Reviews. This one's going to be the big fun one. This is the deployment. This is the big deployment of your network. Man. Most homes, your deployment starts when you get internet. They come out, get you the internet modem, and it either has wireless in it or it's network. Some of them have everything in them, some of them don't. I hear some of them have little streaming boxes that you hook to the network. All kinds of little weird stuff nowadays. From that point, businesses, some homes, you have switches, wireless, modems, all kinds of other things that get connected. I did say modems. Still, businesses can have some modems for your backup internet in case your primary goes down. All these other little things that get into play. Homes, I'm not too sure if you could still have multiple devices like that. A phone line, dial-up, and a high-speed connection on your same service. Some services have wireless access point access when you're away from home. I know that's what mine advertises, but I never use any of that because that's kind of a weird thing that I don't want to get into all the security with. So it boils down to all of that. So home users, you get your device, then you got to figure out how are all your devices going to communicate to the internet, networked or wireless. TVs. If you have a new modern style TV, a lot of them have wireless cards in them. Some of them only have network ports. If you need to stream and you don't have wireless and you have to run a network cable, how are you going to do it? How are you going to get it from there to your device? There's 1.5 million options. Wireless to a repeater bridge, mesh network with the port. Business-wise, access point, different areas. Access point, repeaters, mesh network, all the same. Do the same job. How you deploy it, what you want it to do, how you want it to operate. To me, these two are pretty much identical kind of devices. They use the same network. This one needs a dedicated server with LAN lines to the server to work. It makes this option a lot nicer. You just plug it in. Program the one, plug this in where your internet's at. Boop, 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 boop. Talked about all that mesh network stuff. Go watch that video. So when you get into the deployment, how you're actually going to do this stuff. Just did a video on how you can hook up multiple Wi-Fi, multiple routers off of each other. DHCP, who controls it, who does what. All of this stuff comes into play for businesses. Large businesses are probably all going to go with something like this. You're going to probably spend the money, go for something like this. Medium to small businesses are probably going to lean more to these type of device. The ease, the simplest, the easiest way to maintain it, to do that type of stuff, you're going to probably lean more to a mesh. So these are some of those factors that are out there that I wanted to bring up. So your whole deployment, what you're going to have on your network, how it's going to be set up. You have your internet access. Most businesses are going to have some kind of firewall. This is an older firewall that I have. Has ports that run out, different places, different restrictions, different permissions. Home businesses and homes probably won't have a firewall. They'll have some kind of integrated firewall in their router, has some features. Some cable modems and stuff have some features, but cable modems aren't managed by you, it's managed by your cable company. Got to be aware of that. So you have that option. From that option, even if you have the firewall, you may not need wireless. You may not need a router, depending on how many devices. You might not need a whole switch. If you get into a bigger business, medium business, you have switches, routers, Wi-Fi, depending on the firewall, depending on if you got the rack mount, how many ports, you can set those up, do different things. You might have a whole managed switch stack. You might not even need that, depending on your firewall you have. So this is really where the deployment comes in. This is probably where you'll pay a company that'll come in and do an evaluation. But again, you kind of need to know some of this information so that they don't come in and tell you, here, you need this $30,000 worth of switches and this and that, and a firewall, when ultimately you could kind of get away with dumb switching it, having a separate switch for accounting, have a separate switch for this and that and that and that. If you have enough ports on your firewall and your firewall is managing everything. You might not need layer 3 switches. You might not need layer 2 switches. These are all options when you come into deploying a network you need to figure out. Yes, layer 3 switches are really nice. Then you got to management. You got to configure them. You got to do a lot of things. These are things, if you're a medium business, it's going to cost you money every time you change. Every time you grow and you need to add things, it's going to cost you money. So there's some levels here, security, some features, some other things that really come into play and don't come into play. A lot of this stuff, a lot of this voice over IP phones, a lot of other things come into play too. If you're running those type of services, what is it running on? How is it running? What kind of switching? What kind of stuff do you need? PoE, non-PoE, all of that comes into play. Comes into play here. Do you need PoE for cameras, other things at homes, small businesses? That's where you get into this multi-switches, multi-routers, and multiple things. Because you're not going to have your computers on a PoE switch. Because usually they're more expensive. IP phones, you need on PoE switch to give it power. So this is where multiple switches and multiple things come into play. So I wanted to go through this in a network deployment video so that people really understand all these different factors I've brought up. I have so many videos. Go back and watch these. Go back and look through my whole list of videos. There's so many videos in there about so many different categories that deploying a network, this is where it all comes into. Cabling. What kind of cabling? How's that cable run? Where's it run? If it's indoor, AC buildings, fire ratings, everything. There's a lot of millions of questions about this. I have lots of videos on a simple category as network cable. It's really not that simple. When you get into homes too, this is really an important factor that a lot of people don't pay attention to. This is really a security concern and a lot of other factors here when you get involved in this. So I wanted to bring this up again because this is an important factor that I don't see a lot of people really talk about. They talk about, oh, business-wise and this and that, what rating you're supposed to have. But this might be a factor you might be interested in learning a little bit about. Because there's so many variables. Patch cable, standard cable, cross cables. There's a lot of different variables here. Patch cables between switches and stuff that get moved a lot. Not only switches, devices that get moved a lot. Phones that get moved. Especially now with COVID. Everybody's cleaning. If you're picking up your computers, moving them a lot. Now, that where before you had a standard cable that ran from the wall to the computer, you might need to change that to a patch cable so it doesn't kink and break and get damaged. So there are variables out there that you really want to think about because the cabling in your wall and the cabling that comes out of the wall are two different cables. Especially depending on what locations you're using it in. So that's the deployment of the network. Understanding that. Understanding what gauge cable, what speed you're using. I've talked about this before. These ports on the back. Talked about it on my mesh network video. 10100 gigabit. Huge, huge difference. Especially if you're talking about internet speeds. If you have a 20 meg internet, you can get away with 100 meg NIC. If you're sitting on a 200 meg internet connection like I got right now, that they just upgraded me to, what good's 100 meg NIC? Guess what? You just throttled yourself down to half your internet speed. So these are some of the main factors you want to look at. You want to look at future growth too. If you're buying something, that's really why I went with the gig NIC, because when I bought these and they were 300 meg wireless internet connection, why in the world would I want a 100 meg network connection? It didn't make sense to me to start with to get a 100 meg internet connection when this could talk at 300. I had to go gig. At least I could get the 300 meg throughput. So these are some of those little factors I wanted to bring up when it comes to deploying your network. I know these are all simple little things that people probably go, oh yeah, that makes sense, but if you go out and buy it and then you put it in and then you're kicking yourself later because, oh, you know what? I didn't even think about that. That's one of those little factors. Firewall, same things. You got to know the ports. You got to know how much speed, how much bandwidth, how much that can handle. routers, switches, all of those type of things. Nowadays, the speeds out of some of these devices are just crazy. Especially if you get into business and stuff. 10 gig network cable? 10 gig? That, I understand YouTube and other people that are doing videos and doing other stuff, you need that kind of speed to do your video rendering, to do everything else you want to do. But to me, that is just a mind-blowing thing. Where internet used to be dial-up. You know, now you're running 10 gig between your computer and a server. To me, those are some crazy numbers. All this solid state drives, NVMe drives that communicate so fast that now everything's just poof, 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 poof. It's so fast that it's mind-blowing. That the next steps coming up are going to be so fast. I don't know where we're at, where we're headed. It's to a point that I really didn't think we were going to get to for quite a while. We're there. The next steps are going to be way fast. So, wanted to elaborate some of that. What is the network port on your TV? The one I have, obviously, is a 10100 because it only gets about 70 megs out of an 80 something it says it connects to. So that tells me it's about 100 meg NIC in there. It's not a gig NIC. That tells me the TV doesn't need that much bandwidth because they didn't put a gig NIC in it. Not to mention it looks fine. We get very good picture. It's the ultra high definition TV. You know, it's very nice. Works great. The other TV, I'll have to check the speeds, but I believe it's about the same the last time I checked. So these are some of those factors that come into play. What you're connecting to, what network cables are on there, what NIC cards. But of course, you want to make sure your primary devices, you always have the speeds upgrade. Now, I said it's only a 10100 on there. To me, that's slow and ancient. Because almost everything nowadays has gig NICs. I mentioned, obviously, it's enough speed that it can handle it. But in 2 to 3 years from now, maybe those will be gig NICs. Because we'll be watching 8K, 12K video that it needs that much bandwidth. So making sure you have your primary devices that are between here and there at the speed. And of course, I mentioned, I got 200 gig or 200 meg internet. Well, when I signed up, it used to be 20, I think. And then they went to 50. Then they went to 100, and it stayed at 100 for a while. And now they just jumped it to 200. That's the minimum internet speed from the company that I'm with. So this is where the generation of technology is going. It's going faster, faster. So all this bandwidth and all this other stuff. So it's interesting to know you got a plan for that on deploying your network. Knowing that you at least have gig NIC, you know you have some leverage. If you got 50 meg internet speed at home, or 100 or 200 or 300, I see ads in California for 400, 500. You know this device has some room to gain. Once it gets to over a gig, I'm sure you're going to have to get something different. The device cable modem I just got, I think they said has a 2.5 gig NIC on it. So, to me, that already tells me they're planning for businesses and everything else to be at that point. So, I thought that was really kind of kind of shocked me and blew me away that when they said that, I'm like, oh, wow, really? I'm like, and the first thing I thought, what would you do with that much speed? I can understand for a business, but you'd have to be probably a pretty big business to be running that kind of speed. So I thought it was kind of interesting, kind of struck and caught, and I kind of heard it, and it kind of resonated, and wow, okay. So I wanted to bring that up when you're deploying your network, knowing what you're going to be having on your network and how it's going to be communicating. Most of the time, most people at home, you go out, you get your internet provider, they come and set it up, and they talk you into their Wi-Fi, or they talk you into this or that, and you're pretty much done. Oh, man. You connect to that, you're done. Maybe you want something different. Mentioned on these devices, photo sharing, media sharing, all kinds of other things, all kinds of other features on here. Mentioned before, most of those cable modems are managed by the cable company. They're not managed by you. So you don't control any of the security, you don't control anything. Maybe you want those options to control that stuff. Maybe you want to put a firewall. Maybe you want your own so you can manage parental guards, manage anything you want, do what you want on your network without having to deal with them. You can add a device. Maybe you decide you want to start streaming TV. Get rid of your cable provider, TV, satellite provider, whatever it is, and start streaming TV. Maybe you just want to go back to antenna TV. There's a million options out there, but antenna TV, I brought that up because some of these options out there are talking about antenna TV through Wi-Fi. So this is why I brought that up, because this might end up being more in the future and might not. At the time this is filmed, I see some stuff out there that they're selling to do this. You hook it up to your antenna and it broadcasts out on your Wi-Fi, and you hook a device to your TV and it tunes it in. Might be a thing of the future, might not be. But right now it's talking about through your network. So the whole deployment of this is really the key importance of understanding what you're going to need, how you're going to need it, how much you're going to need. Again, you might not have to go out to the store and buy all this stuff brand new. I've talked about thrift stores and other places you can get devices that people are going out buying the brand new technology, giving away their older stuff. It's being resold for very good prices. This device was from a thrift store. This device was thrift store. Was purchased online. Don't want to name the company, but it was basically used, secondhand. But have a video on this mesh network. There's lots of stuff out there that you can go through and find stuff to add on. A lot of the new printers have Wi-Fi enabled features. If you have an old style printer, maybe you will need a printer hub to attach to. Maybe you're printing something on dot metrics, something old. Maybe you're doing something arts and crafts wise, something that you need a certain kind of printer. And it might be a really old printer, but it should still work if you have the right pieces to connect together. All of this is part of your deployment of your network, knowing what you're going to need. I have lots and lots of videos on here. I want to go back to that. Lots and lots of videos where you can go back and watch oh, I want to know more about this. I want to know more about meshing. I want to know about the access points. I want to know about firewalls. I want to know about business grade access points. I want to know about all this stuff. Business grade access points are not only for businesses. There are people that put these in their homes. They're probably not the everyday average people. They're probably more IT trained, educated people that decided they wanted this. I didn't want this. It's too much work, too much equipment, too much other stuff. This worked out very nicely. Because basically all it was involved was these and my computer or whatever else needed to connect to, and I used my phone to manage it. That's it. So, depending on how the tech is and how it's done, again, old tech, new modern tech, cell phones, tablets, type of things, might vary what you want to deal with. When you have a cell phone where you have an app, you get on the internet provider, your Wi-Fi, and you click the app and it logs in to this device and you can manage it. Might be what you need. These kind of devices, either you got to wire into them physically or you got to log in, have all the videos on that. If you don't have an IP, if it's a new configuration, all of those type of things, what need to be done to configure these. There's other features, different things that might be involved in configuring these things, depending on what kind of devices you actually have attached. If you're just using cell phones, simple tablets, you might just do something like this, throw these up, poop, 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 and you're done. It's really simple. You don't have to worry about a lot. If you get into a business environment, you have workstations. Maybe you need wireless for cell phones because people are using cell phones in the business. Maybe you need wireless for point of sales tablets that you're in a restaurant, something of that sort. Then you have different varieties that you can go through. This is all part of the deployment of the network. Knowing what cabling is really a major factor. Knowing a lot of these factors. This was the big thing to know. You can hire companies, they can come out and draw you diagrams and all this type of stuff. Use the technical logos and symbols and all of that type of stuff. The Cisco certified network engineers that will do all of that type of stuff. Or you can basically do it yourself. You don't have to get as technical as that. Basically, you just put this, the computer, most of that stuff I just use on paint. Draw little boxes, label them, know how they're all connected. You can get detailed. You can lay out the exact switch, ports, and what port goes where, how, depending on when you're going to configure this stuff. If you're using a level 3 switch with port forwarding and all these other type of things that you can do, you can get into more detail on that. It's all up to you on how far you want to go. But for home, you could go pretty simple. So I wanted to do this to explain a lot of this. I know it's a lot of details I've already gone over in all my other videos. But all those videos are there to understand the actual deployment. How you actually set this up. Where you're going to actually do this. How you're going to do it. So that when you get to that point, or if you already have something and then you want to add something, you know how to do it. You don't have to take everything out and start over. last video is about how to hook a switch to a switch and how to use all these other things. There are lots and lots of variety. If for some weird reason, like where I'm at, I can't get internet to go 30 feet. So I went with a mesh network. And I have them all over the place. I had to do that. If you're in one of those kind of weird areas, that might be something that you need to do. That maybe you had an older router or something already there that is already hooked up to a lot of your devices, but you have dead zones and you have different things. You can actually hook that up to that. Hook these into all those dead zones and you can have your internet. Doesn't mean you have to take this out to put this in. So this is some of the part I wanted to cover in the deployment. I know I covered that in some of the other videos, but this is really where in deployment is not only your original setup, but as for your future growth. You want to make sure you always have that future growth potential. If you buy a switch and you only need 5 ports or 4 ports out to whatever devices, and you have a choice between a 4-port switch and an 8-port switch, and 8-port switch is $3 more. My recommendation, if it fits in the area and is about the same size, most of them nowadays are pretty similar. One might be this, one might be that, very close to the same size. I would recommend buying the bigger. Because what if you want to add something later? Now, there's a variable here. If you have a switch that runs out to 2 or 3 of these Wi-Fi routers or something of that sort, where you actually have ports in the back, you still have expandability. If you have a device, an older device, similar to this, that doesn't have an out port, but only has an in port, you might decide to change this device out for one that has both ports so you have expandability. This is part of the thing that I consider deploying of your network. When you're shopping for these devices, to look at, does it have an in, does it have an out, does it have multiple ports, what does it have? I believe the nicer device that I was looking at, the newer Wi-Fi 6 device I was looking at, has more than one network port out on them. This one has one in, one out. That's really nice because, like I said before, I have this under a TV, I have the network cable running up to the TV, and I have that broadcasting the internet. So it's doing everything I need. But if you're a gamer or something of that sort, and you have a gaming console underneath that TV attached, you might need that extra port because you might want to go to your gaming console and your TV, where you don't have to unplug, replug. If that's not an option, maybe buy a simple switch. Put a switch between that device and all your other items. Maybe you have 8 items on that desktop. Maybe you have PlayStation, GameCube, a Nintendo, newer Nintendo, whatever. Consoles are out right now, maybe some of your older consoles. You might need more ports. So this is where the deployment comes in. Knowing that you have the future growth to do what you need to do. I have all the future growth because I have that device with the port that comes out. I can actually take this device right here, plug it in, hook it in, and run other devices off. I don't have to use the Wi-Fi off of this. I can turn Wi-Fi and everything off of this. So I can use it as a standard switch or a router. So those are some of the factors I wanted to bring up, is your actual deployment. One of the other factors I like to bring up with the deployment is your power usage, especially nowadays. Power bills can be so expensive. Having one device that can do everything you want, like this, where you have your Wi-Fi, your router, everything in one. Some of these business grades have the firewall, everything in one with one power plug-in, can actually save you money instead of having your firewall, your Wi-Fi router, a router, all these other things plugged in. Not to mention, if you want a UPS on there so that it doesn't shut off when there's a power outage, power surge protection, any of those type of things, you get into more cost because now you have more units attached to one device. Goes back to the deployment. Trying to save money by buying separate devices, but then you have to pay more money for this other unit. So these are some of those little factors I wanted to bring up. Some of it don't matter, some of it does. But this is the factor on deployment. A lot of people don't realize about, oh, I'll just add this and I'll just add that. Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, it might cost you a little bit more. They shouldn't use that much more power. But it's one of those things that, okay, instead of one power outlet you need, now you need 7. So now you need a power strip. So then what kind of power strip? Because each plug is different shape, different angle, different facing different ways. You might need to get a really long one because you need to space them out. So you think you have 8. This is part of the deployment. You have 8 plugs, but you actually need 16 outlets because you need space between them because of those big outlets that covers the other outlet. You want to plug something like that in. It covers the other outlet next to it. Or it covers 2 or 3. So you got to make sure that's at the end. So you got to make sure all your lines line up. These are just some of those little tiny things when you get into deploying networks that you're like, you run into that just kind of drive you crazy. Because nothing's standard, nothing's the way you think it really should be. So looking at all of this, knowing what you got, how to deploy it, what parts you're going to need, knowing how many network cables you're going to need, knowing the length of how many cables you're going to need, all of those little tiny things come into play. So this is really where I wanted to touch on your deployment. And I have videos and videos and videos on all these separate parts. So if you want more detail on each part, go back and watch those. But for the deployment factor of how you actually set it up, put it out there and get it all to work together, and knowing what features you want, how you want it to function. This is really one of the big issues out there that people don't think of at all. They go out, get their internet, oh, I'll use their wireless modem, boom, I'm done. Go online, do research, they'll talk about, oh, if you have dead spots in your home, you need to add one of these, blah, 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 blah. Why that's so popular is because nobody thought of the deployment. Everybody runs out and buys these to resolve those problems. I've had a video mentioning the downside of these is the speed drop off by using these. Yeah, you get your internet provider's internet, but you have slower speeds and you have latency and you have other things. Because like I mentioned on these devices, they only talk to one device at a time. And the differences between the mesh, access point, repeaters, what the differences are. I did mention access point repeater. This device actually does 2 different things depending on how you set it up, how you plug it in. You can hook it up by the network cable, or you can hook it up by the wireless. So these are some of those factors when you come into the deployment. That is a big deal. That is something that you really need to stop and think about before you just run out and buy something. Because I don't want you to run out and pay $50, $100 for a repeater, and then you're not happy with the results, or it's too slow, or it's dropping, or you don't even know how to configure it, or you can't configure it, or you don't know how to configure it, or you can't even remote log into it or anything. I have videos on that. That's why those videos are here. It's for the deployment of how you get these things to work. And understanding all this can work together. There is not really one thing you cannot use together. You can have multiple firewalls. You can have multiple Wi-Fi. You can have a main firewall and Wi-Fi and a router and a firewall over here in your network, and you can have a firewall way over here on your other side of your network. Because you might be allowing certain things through for your CEOs and your bosses of this level that you need to restrict for your bottom levels. For your accounting, your research, all these other departments that I've mentioned before in all these videos. You might need a separate firewall for that. Not to mention a separate firewall inside also can prevent CEOs and other management from accessing stuff in research or in accounting that they shouldn't be accessing. Child guard type of protections. You might want your child on a separate network than on your network, but you want to monitor everything that's going on that network. But you know the child can't actually get into your network or have anything go on with your network. Because you have viruses, you have Trojan horses, you have everything else. You're doing all your banking, you're doing all your other stuff, you're doing all your remote working, you're doing all this stuff on your network. Your child's on there doing a schooling, doing other stuff, talking to friends, doing whatever they got to do. You never know. Security-wise, you might want to separate those two. You never know what's going on. Technology's changing. There's so much stuff coming out. This is deploying the network. TV networks, games, all those type of things might be on a separate Wi-Fi network. If you have a certain area of the house, again, kids network, your network. Kids network has the video games, all that type of stuff that's communicating to that device, and you log into that device and it slows down big time because they're in there playing their games at 8K that's killing your Wi-Fi speed. When you can log into a separate device and have nice connection to that device, knowing you have a good enough internet connection where these two devices are talking to another device or run through each other, that they're not using the same Wi-Fi antennas. So this is where the deployment comes in. This is where a lot of these factors come in. So I wanted to cover that because there are variables out there that would really justify having two routers, even in a home environment. Even 3 routers. If you have security cameras and you have other stuff running, some people have a whole separate other device for guest network. If you have a lot of people coming over, guest network keeps the network separate, but most of these allow a guest network on your network. But again, it goes down to bottlenecking down the network because you have your guest on your network while you're logging onto your network. Yeah, they're separate, but it's still the same device. So this is the deployment factor. I have so many videos. Again, please go back, watch all those. the deployment of the network, how all these things all work together. So this is why I'm doing this video. It's so that you understand how you hook up, how to make sure you buy the proper speed, what to look at. Do your homework, do your research, look up things. Make sure when you look it up, even as simple as something like this, there's like 6 different models. What model works for you? What model doesn't work for you? What has the features you want? You need something like this. This and this is the same device. This plugs in with the cord, but this plugs into an outlet. There are so many varieties out there that I wanted to touch base on this, on the deployment. This is deployment, I consider, again, your networking, your layout, your actual putting it in. What devices, doing your research, knowing what you're going to get. Because again, once you get your internet, or even if you're in a business, you have all this stuff, all these computers networked, and you have all these servers connected, and then you decide, oh, today's technology is all these tablets, all these things, all these paid at the table type of tablets. You need internet, Wi-Fi. What kind of Wi-Fi? What kind of security? What kind of encryption? What kind of firewall features? Do you want anybody on your network to be able to access anything on that Wi-Fi network? All those tablets, phones, whatever that are doing the point of sales are on the same network as your accounting and your research and your CEOs. Do you want them to even have any kind of access to that network? Do you want them to even be able to see any of that kind of part in the network? Then you get into VLANs, you get into level 3 switches, you get into firewalls, you get into separate Wi-Fis, you get into all these other little features. Just as simple as adding Wi-Fi for a tablet to ring in someone's order. So these are some of those little factors I wanted to bring up. Even as simple as a management phone. If they're on the floor with customers, on the floor, in a factory, anything of that sort, where they might need email access, might need any of that type of stuff, how secure do you want it? Yeah, they can use their wireless signal most of the time, depending on how your email server is. Is it an internal only email server where it doesn't go out to the internet at all? Nobody on the internet has access. So you might need to have Wi-Fi for them to actually access the email. There's a lot of little factors that come into play. That's the deployment. And the deployment, I don't consider a one-time thing. Because you might go in and say, oh man, you know what we need? We just need the good internet, 300, 400 meg with a wireless router on there, and I'll network that into our network stack switch and we'll be fine. We have internet access towards the back, towards the CEOs that can all get onto that, they'll be fine. Well, maybe it doesn't cover the entire back area. Maybe it covers this part and this part's a dead zone. Then what? This is all part of your deployment. And the hard part is you cannot know and guarantee that that internet will cover that. They'll tell you, yeah, it'll cover up to 200 feet, but in an area like I'm at where I can't even get Wi-Fi to travel 30 feet, you might be in an area like that. You might be in a busy downtown area with a lot of interference and a lot of other stuff, where then you run into something like that. This is all part of, that's why I consider this all part of deployment. Because maybe you have that Wi-Fi in that key offices area, it's your CEOs and your other little group in that area, IT, whatever you got that needs the Wi-Fi. And a year later, you have other people that come in that want Wi-Fi. That's still part of the deployment. Because now you're adding to this unit to deploy something else. So that's why I consider that all part of the deployment, and I want everybody to consider that is the future growth. Maybe you put this unit in, and in a year or two from there, when they need that, this unit, you might decide, you know what? I don't want to use the network cable that's there and put in something like this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this. Maybe I just go this. You can actually take that out, put that in, but I want to give everybody the option to understand. You do not have to take out and put in new. You can always add on. You can always update with the mesh. Router to router mesh, mesh network, repeater, access points, because maybe you need to put in multiple. Maybe this is covering the middle and you need to cover the whole area. Maybe this is covering here and there's a whole big area that you want now covered. Maybe you want the whole warehouse, storage, manufacturing, everything covered. You might go with something like this and mount them. So that way they can be strategically placed, run wires to a PoE switch that's powered into the back, into whatever units where you don't need that. This could cover your entire factory, buildings, everything, if you have enough of them. And you'd put the server and all of that stuff in the location. So there's a lot of variables here that I wanted to cover under deployment, because deployment can vary. And I wanted people to understand the differences when you go to deploy your network. Yes, you start out usually with your internet source, and then you go from there, or in a business, how many computers, how they're going to communicate, and then out to the internet. Yeah, that's fine. It might be all wired. You might not use any of this type of stuff. But then you're using switches. And how many switches? And then you might have a stack switch with network lines that run to certain places, and you might need to put other network stacks of switches and other things in and network out. So these are all those kind of deployment factors. You might have a part of the building that's used and the other part that's empty, and then 5 years from now, all of a sudden, all that area is going to be full, where you either have to run new lines or put a network stack in off the network. Switch stack. So there's so many variables when you come to deploying a network. So I wanted to cover a lot of that under the deployment. And I believe that covers everything that I really wanted to cover. Again, go back, watch all those other videos. I've got like 2 years worth of videos on here that cover each and every single component that you have to do with the network. If there's something that comes up, again, placement of servers, making sure they're in a secure, safe place, making sure you don't leave them out in the opening, making sure you don't have a server as a workstation, making sure you have proper wiring, making sure your faceplates are done right, making sure your network cables are done, keystone jacks, color of keystone jacks, color of wiring, all kinds of things come into play. You can do a lot of things. You can do accounting as a color wiring, you can do ends, you can do boots, I have all these type of things on all these videos on the deployment. Like I said, a simple little thing like this can get really complicated and can make life a lot easier, especially if you're a home user. If you have 3 or 4 of these cables that run off to different things, and they're all white, and they all look exactly the same, where does this cable run? What else? network cable. This one's a flat cable. Still been testing them. They seem to be okay for Cat 7. Now you tell me. They're both white. One's shielded. One's not shielded. These are two variables that come into play too again. Knowing what ports are on there. I have all those videos on shielded, unshielded ports. Maybe you need to run shielded from certain devices and other devices not shielded. But if you have these two cables plugged into a certain device, they're not the same, right? They're both white. They're color coded. When you go to that other device and you see it, if it's flat or round, and these are the only two cables you have plugged in, guess what cable you have on the other side? Makes it easier. Makes it easier if you have a blue cable, a white cable, orange cable, green cables, whatever color you want. They come in lots of different colors. I don't think I have any right here in front of me, but yes, I do. Yellow cable. I have a blue long cable in there. Makes it a lot easier to determine where these are going. So that's another factor when you do a deployment. Could be just as simple as you have your internet runs out to your Wi-Fi, plugs in the house, mine's black. So when I look up there, it's the black cable. Lines running off into my bedroom are green. The other line that runs off to the back was blue. I can tell where those lines have run. Yes, the two that go in the bedroom, I can't tell which one's which, but they're both hooked up to the same device, so it doesn't matter. They're both going to the same area, so it doesn't really matter to me, because I'm not unhooking one of them to do the other one. If I test them, it's not that big of a deal. It's just two lines. I know they're the green lines. So you get into that variable when you do stuff to know what you want to do. Simple little thing like that, different color lines, will make it easier for you to find out where your stuff is run on your network. Some people might not like that. Some people don't like that. They want them all the same color. They want it to match. You don't want to see it. You don't want to know it's there. So if your walls are blue, they run blue lines. If your walls are gray, they run gray lines. You can do that. That's another option when you deploy your network. So let's say your bedroom, you have a red wall. Your living room is blue. Your other room is white. You can actually, if you have from the TV running down and it's a blue wall, run a blue line that pretty much matches. It might not be the exact same blue, but it's at least blue where it doesn't stand out like a yellow line or a white line running down a blue wall. So these are some of those factors I wanted to bring up with deploying of a network. Knowing, kind of make it look nice too. Because I've seen it where people will have like bright orange lines that run on their walls and they have them tacked down and, like, woo-hoo-hoo. Like, man, that sucker sticks out. Couldn't you, pick a different color? Oh, I didn't think about it. I just grabbed cabling. Well, that might be something you want to think of when you do your deployment. Same thing with these devices. Some people are really, really picky. Someone might choose this device over this device just because of the looks. So I wanted to bring that up. One of the real reasons why I like this device was it looked nice. You plugged it in, the wires came out, they went in and they were gone. You couldn't really see them. It was a nice clean device. compared to this big black device. I mean, it stands out pretty well, don't it? So that's one of the factors I kind of wanted to bring up with deploying. Sometimes there's the options of colors, depending on what you're looking at. Cabling, devices, sometimes there's not. Sometimes that might be a major factor in someone's decision. This might be the perfect device that works for them and everything, but they end up going with something like this because they have a drop down ceiling. They can put it on top of it, cover it, you don't see it. This one doesn't have any place to hang it, hook it, so you're going to have to set it somewhere. Primary reason why I bought these, I can plug it into the wall. Again, brought that up on the other video. Plug it in. This and this is the same model in the unit, but this one has the power with the ports to plug in. There's a difference here too than on here. This looks a lot cleaner. You just run a wire underneath, flat wire, whatever. Looks a lot cleaner than you actually being able to see all your plugs hang out the back. So there's styles, there's certain things that you might want to look at when you deploy the network. A lot of people probably don't care. They're looking for this style, they're going to do gaming, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. They don't care. But then you might have that for your gaming area, but how about your living room, your fancy room, your dining area, something nice? You might want to have both, so you have something nice that doesn't stand out. One of the key features with this is it has a little indicator light on top. In the settings, you can tell it, don't turn on the indicator light. That really made this more presentable, because now you don't see the green or red light. It's just a white little box sitting there on the shelf. Makes it look a lot cleaner. I know I've gone on and on and on and on about this deployment, but these are those little tiny factors that I don't really see anybody really talk about when you go to deploy this, when you go to set it up. Once you get your first part and you get things set up, and then what if you have a problem, or what if this comes up? Oh, just go out and buy one of these. Configure it and plug it in. Yeah, you could. You could do that. But you could do all of that. What if you're in a bigger environment than that supports? Have videos on the mesh network, all this type of stuff. The mesh network covers that in a bigger environment. How many of these devices can be connected together compared to this? All of these factors come into play. This is the key reason in the deployment video, is so that you know how all of this works together. So you know, man, when I do this, I can do that, and I can, oh, you know, it'd be so nice to pick this color cable for this and this color cable for that. And if I have troubleshooting and I go from the bedroom and I got to go over there to check something, bam, I know where it's at. I don't have to tone it. I don't have to line test it. I don't have to do anything to make sure that that line's the right line. If you're running new lines in the walls, you can also do color too. You can do a lot of different things. Do homework, do more research, do whatever you need to do. Make sure you get what you want. Make sure you understand the issues that can come up later and how you can resolve those issues. Because the worst thing you want to do is run cabling and then run into a problem and go, man, this is a pain in the butt. I should have used blue in here and I should have done this and that because nobody told me. I just went out and bought one single box of cable. Yeah, it's going to cost you a little bit more because you're going to have to buy more cable and you're going to have to buy more stuff. But there's other ways around it. I've shown the boots. You can put the different color boots on the end. There's a lot of different factors you can do to make this easier. So that is part of the deployment. And that's what makes computer stuff so hard. Even though it's so simple, it makes it so hard. Because you go from this to this when you could just go from this to a new this or add this. You get so many varieties and so many options. But then if you go to this, do you remove this? Why would I remove this if I have this? And how do I configure them both so I have both? So I have all the features that I talked about that are on these. Your sharing, your other things. As you saw in here, there's no USB. So this has certain features, this doesn't. I believe the new big fancy Wi-Fi 6 model, it's a different shape, bigger, I believe has USB. It has some other features. So now a lot of this stuff is really getting really interchangeable. So depending on what you want, how you want it, what features you want, this is the factors that I wanted to show. And this is all the deployment. This is your planning. This is your purchasing. How you're going to set this up. What items you're going to need. Again, I know I've gone on and on and on, but this can save you time, save you money, save you headaches. So I think I'll wrap this one up. I think I've gone over everything. I've shown you most of it. I don't really need to show you a rack mount switch. I think everybody understands what a rack mount switch is. Not to mention standard switches, little network switches, all of these other things can get deployed in here to serve what you need it to serve, to do what you need it to do. So I know this is long, but again, I've done 2 years of videos to get you to this point on each one of these devices and everything in between and how you connect them. Servers, all of those type of things can get connected to this. You can be at home, you can do a web server, you can do all kinds of things, host the websites, all kinds of things, but you're going to need all of these kind of components and how you're going to set them up and what you're going to do. So business-wise, everything. This all comes into play. All right, I know I've gone on long enough. I'm going to wrap it up. So, hope everybody likes it. Hits the bell, subscribe, let everybody know. Watch all the other videos because they all relate to this. Thank you very much.